So greetings all. I think there was some trouble with the URL, so I just wanted to give people a little extra time. And I also, just while I was waiting, I changed the picture for those who've been here already, because I forgot that we had just discovered this picture and it's so interesting. I thought for people in Princeton, they might find it of interest as well. So hold on one second, I gotta get back to that. My name is Mary Cadwallader. Can you hear me? No?
Hang on, Mary, I'm going to mute everyone. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Today we'll be talking about after 25 years in exile, Tory repatriates to Princeton, Massachusetts. My name is Mary Cadwallader. I'm with the Princeton Historical Society, and I will be sharing the mic with Nathaniel Gove. Nathaniel, I'll let you introduce yourself real quick.
Unmute yourself, Nathaniel.
1,000 pardons. Nathaniel Gove, I live at 15 Gregory Hill Road and a member of the board of the Princeton Historical Society. Thank you for attending.
So we are going to talk about Princeton and many things, most particularly the Boylstons. The reason I changed the photo, because this is a photo that I just saw for the first time of Princeton. For those who live here might recognize where this is. Maybe not, but this is a back view. This would be Worcester Road right here, and this is the old Boylston barn that was part of the main house. If you look right here, you will see the back of the main house, the Boylston Villa that we're going to be talking about today. And as you go along up, of course, there's Mount Wachusett. For those who aren't familiar, there were no trees to speak of at this time. We're guessing this is about 1860 or 50, because right here is a church called the Methodist Church, which is right on 62, but it burnt down. So there's not a lot of pictures that show both the Methodist Church and the Congregational Church. And again, the Congregational Church is on the common in this picture. It is subsequently moved across the street. So we thought this was just a really fun picture. I thought I'd share it with you. Particularly because you get a sense, as this will become more important later, you get a sense of the back of the Boylston Villa. The thought is, because it was so dramatic, that people came from the country road up in through the back to go up to the carriage house. Something that most people who haven't been in the house aren't aware of, that this back is so, it's got the columns and it's got the drama to it. So let us go. We say a Tory repatriates because there weren't, there was a big mix at the time of Tories and loyalists of the time that Ward Nicholas Boylston was involved with in the Boston area. In fact, we have a thing in our collection. It's the Princeton militia handwritten note with, I think, about 13 signatures of to their commandant, the British commandant, saying they're no longer going to listen to what they say. So it was a very heightened time. And the mixes went throughout families and others, so you probably can relate to that in current events, how things have been split. As you all know, just if someone trying to get on, hold on. As you all know, you're all muted. Any questions you have, or you write in the chat, Harry Pape's on board. He's going to help us with that. The program will be recorded and posted on the PHS website. Nathaniel and I are using as many sources as we can, legitimate ones, we hope. If you want any more information, let us know. But there's always a possibility that we haven't got it 100% right, although we are diligent in what we do. So today we're going to talk about Ward Nicholas Boylston, and the reason we're talking about him is because of his beautiful home, the Boylston Villa, which is on Worcester Road. We'll talk a lot more about the house shortly. But Ward Nicholas Boylston was influenced by quite a few members of his family, and his introduction to Princeton was also a reflection of that. One of them would be Rebecca Boylston Gill, who married Moses Gill, who would be the person that lived on the same lands before he built his house. Nathaniel's going to speak in detail about Moses Gill and his part in Princeton, as well as Rebecca. Another person who's of interest, because over his life, Ward Nicholas Boylston was considered a philanthropist, and he was very influenced to help the medical community. And he had a great uncle who was a very interesting person, Zabdiel, maybe it's Zabdiel Boylston. He was the first one to introduce smallpox inoculation into the colonies. And an interesting story is Cotton Mather's slave, one is I don't know if I said his name right, told him that he can't get smallpox because when he was in Africa, they had taken the pustule and put it into him, and he didn't. And Cotton Mather was trying to get doctors to try this out, and Dr. Boylston did, and was extremely successful, as you probably suspect. But he was also greatly ridiculed. He had bombs thrown in his windows. They thought it was heresy in some ways. In other ways, they thought he was trying to kill people. So Boylston has a great respect and dedication to the medical community. The other person in this fine dapper outfit here, Nicholas Boylston, was his uncle. Nicholas Boylston, as well as his brother Thomas, were without children, and he very much wanted the Boylston name to go on. So he made a proposal to Ward, who was born Ward Hallowell. He made a proposal to him to say, if you take my name, he will give you his inheritance and all that goes with it. So in 1770, I'm sorry, Ward Hallowell became Ward Nicholas Boylston by royal decree. And only a year later, Nicholas Boylston, his uncle Nicholas, died, and he was given the inheritance. Now, Thomas Boylston takes a big part only in the fact that when the British were losing after the Tea Party and after Lexington and Concord, Thomas Boylston decided to stay around in Boston, and he wasn't very successful. He actually became greatly indebted, and it's because of his debt inheritance that brought Ward Nicholas Boylston back to Boston. And whether you know it or not, another small world, Boylston was a cousin of John Quincy Adams, as well as John Adams, who was the 6th president of the United States. So I'll tell you more about that as well. So there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of positive things that these people were doing in the community, but they certainly had the funds to do so. So let me tell you about Ward Nicholas. He was born to the Hallowells, as I mentioned, and he changed his name. A significant part of his life is when he left Boston for the European tour for his health. He went to many, many countries. He went to Turkey. He went to, let me see if I got my list correct. He went to all over Europe. He went to North Africa and so forth. So he was gone for almost 3 years. And what's interesting about this is that he also got married just before then to a woman named Anne Molyneux, his first wife. What's significant about Anne Molyneux is that Ward Nicholas Boylston is a clear loyalist. He's a merchant. He's very connected to London. And he's loyal to the crown. Whereas Anne Molyneux, he met her and basically they say they eloped. They got married on the HMS, can't remember, it's in the Portsmouth Harbor. There's no record of the actual wedding or the marriage, but they ran off to get married. And what's funny in talking about different family members, how they all don't have the same opinion. Her father was a particularly aggressive patriot. He actually went to the Boston Tea Party without any disguise. He was called a charismatic street agitator, and he was a friend of Sam Adams and one of the most influential and radical patriots. It says, by some accounts, he had more authority on the streets of pre-revolutionary Boston than Adams himself. So for Ward Nicholas Boylston to marry this young woman at this time must have been very controversial. I meant to mention that Benjamin, his father, was the customs officer. So you can imagine, between tea parties and all such things, it was a very controversial wedding. Well, it wasn't a successful wedding either. He went off for 3 years after he married her, and on his world tour, and she ended up going, as did the rest of his family, to London when the Concord situation happened and things were getting not very good for the Loyalists. She went to London, but she ended up dying early 1779 when she was coming back to the US, but Boylston had divorced her before that. So he went on in 1800, his Moses Gill died. And as I said, Nathaniel's going to talk about Moses Gill, but Boylston needed to come back. I neglected to mention the most important thing. When he was on the European tour, I think he was just coming back into Italy, because he had been completely out of touch, and he found out about the Lexington. He came back 2 weeks before the Lexington-Concord conflict in 1775. So he was right in the middle of the heat of all that was going on. So from that point on, he didn't come back to the United States for 25 years. He went to London and became a businessman, and because of the timing, he never made it back to the US. But all the family that he had at that point had eventually gone through Halifax back to London. They did have one son, which was kind of an unfortunate story, Nicky. I don't think Ward had a very good relationship with Nicky. He ended up marrying a woman from South Carolina, and Ward Nicholas Boylston apparently supported Anne, but said he would only support her if he stayed away from supported Nicky's wife, only supportive if she'd stay away from Nicky. So some disjointedness there too. He married Alice Darrow Boylston, who was his second wife, in Copley Square in 1807. She was a British woman. They must have met in London, of course, but they got married over here. And they spent a great deal of time at the Gill Mansion, which Nathaniel will talk more about shortly. They spent summers in Princeton, so they did become very enamored with the town and with the people of the town, and ultimately with their own home there. They had two children, John Lane Boylston and Sally Brooks, who was a local person. Her father owned the Brooks Hotel right on the corner off the Common. So they became Princetonians for real then. And they had a son who died relatively young, Thomas Boylston. As I said, he was a philanthropist. He donated the Princeton Town Common, the parsonage, which is the house. It is Marjorie O'Leary's house, which is the they call the Samuel Clark house, because he had also given the stipend to Samuel Clark to live there, and also the land where the church now sits. They did a lot with Harvard. Nicholas wanted to start a chair of rhetoric and oratory, which he did, with the condition that John Quincy Adams would be the first professor of that particular chair in Harvard. They also started the I think it was called the Harvard Medical Society. So they did a lot of Ward Nicholas Boylston gave a lot to Harvard. What's interesting is I was reading about it. The professor of rhetoric and oratory in 1997, the professor was Seamus Heaney, for those of you who read Irish poetry. So as any story would have it, there's a bit of intrigue with Alicia Darrow. The Mass Historical Society has all the papers of the Boylston given by the last person who possessed them. And the Mass Historical Society has just a little flyer that says, "We're trying to figure this out." Apparently, John Lane and Thomas Boylston were born prior to 1807. So they were born in England prior to 1807. So there's some suspicion that, of course, Anne Molyneux left in 1779, that they weren't married when they came, but they had two children. Not the end of the world, but I'm sure there was a sort of contemporary discussion about everybody knows it type of thing. So there's a quote from it says from a contemporary, says, "I pass over the doubt which exists and has for many years existed as to the marriage of the present Mrs. Boylston or the legitimacy of her children." And I think that's because they were considered one of the inheritors. So it was intentional that they wanted the descendants of the two of them not to be the first in line. So let's look at the difference in this time of hot debate on the patriot versus loyalist. And like we see today, these are two comments by the Boston Tea Party by two different people. And I'll read John Adams, our second president. This is John Quincy. This is John Adams. Speaking of the Boston Tea Party, "This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the patriots that I greatly admire. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, so intrepid, and so inflexible, and it must have so important consequences and so lasting that I cannot but consider it as an epoch in history." John Adams, 1773. Well, as I mentioned, Mr. Boylston was over on his European tour, and his thoughts were he favored, in response to the Tea Party, he favored spirited and decisive measures to bring the patriots to obedience. Such acts of outrage will surely never be passed over unnoticed. So I'm sure Mr. Boylston changed his mind about patriot versus loyalist as he came back. But these are cousins, John Adams being a cousin of Ward as well. So with that, I am going to send you over to hear a little bit about Moses Gill, who had the house that preceded the villa, just down the street there. And I'm gonna keep sharing. I'm sorry, that's right, I gotta share. You're not doing it. Hold on, back again. I'm gonna send you to Nathaniel.
Okay, Mary, if you could bring up the slide of Moses, that would be wonderful.
Oh, you can't see it, I apologize. I thought I just brought it back up. I can't get out of this slideshow, that's what's getting me.
There we go. Little
Not yet. There you go. I'm gonna get you there.
Attention to that slide. Well, good day, citizens, as they would say in the late 18th century. This is Moses Gill. This portrait was done by Copley in 1764, and it resides at Risdy. Moses was born in 1734 in Charlestown, and at an early age, he became a merchant in Boston, and he was quite successful. Now, I should double back and say, I'm just going to kind of give you bullet points about Moses, his two wives, and the estate, because those are programs that could be done on themselves, and we're focusing on Boylston. Moses was an out-and-out colonist. However, he turned revolutionary and a patriot quite quickly and easily. By 1775, he was a judge in the Court of Common Pleas in the county of Worcester, as well as a counselor for the Commonwealth. In 1775, he repaired to Springfield to escort General Washington and General Lee back to Boston. And that's a pretty strong patriot, I would say, if you're escorting Washington and Lee. Moses gave himself as well as his property to the cause of liberty. He would sacrifice all that he had for his country if needed. So he offered the cause, his property and, himself to for the cause of patriotism, anything he could do. He was part of the 15 counselors that acted as governor in 1775. They raised troops, ships, approved judges and magistrates, and he stayed in this role until 1780. Moses was lieutenant governor until 1799, when acting governor Sumner died. Unfortunately, this role of acting governor would only last a year. Moses Gill died in 1800. Next slide, Mary. Now we have Sarah Prince here, born in 1728. As you can see, this portrait was before they invented colored pigments in paint. Sarah was the first wife of Moses. She was the only child of Thomas Prince, who was the pastor of Old South Church in Boston, as well as a surveyor. And he was given the task of surveying this part of Massachusetts. And at that time, surveyors were some of the most wealthy people of the country, and they were able to acquire the land that they surveyed. So Thomas Prince acquired a lot of land in Worcester County. This portrait was done by Copley as well in 1764, and it is housed at RISD as well. Sarah was 6 years his senior. They had no children together, and unfortunately, Sarah died in 1771 at the age of 43. Next slide, Mary. There we have it. That is the Gill estate. And Mary and I believe that there's probably a lot of artist license going on here. So what you see here is the main house. All right, what you see here is the main house and a lot of the other buildings. Moses Gill took up residence here in 1767. The Gill residence was known as and described as a perfect wilderness as the deepest forests of our country. And this came from the Massachusetts Magazine. The mansion, main house, was 50 by 50 feet square with 4 chimney stacks. As well on the estate, there was a farmhouse, which was 40 by 36. There was a coach house, a chaise house, and a 200 by 32 foot barn, which I believe is to the left of the main house, next to the little building that kind of looks like a chapel. Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I think that might be the large barn. And the main property there was all surrounded by an elegant fencing. Now the whole estate was 3,000 acres. And it sat about 600 feet south of Boylston Villa. And it would be, and between there is Doc Howard's house, which sits kind of proud to the road.
Ready?
Yes. Oh, no, we're sorry, Mary. We're still on the estate.
Okay.
From that acreage, Moses gave the first town common, which we know as Russell Corner. He also gave the land for the second town common up on Mountain Road, where Meeting House Cemetery and the town pound still remain. And across the street was the training ground for the Princeton Minutemen. By 1816, the house was in ruins or disrepair. I believe it's probably because there was just so much upkeep to such a large estate. And in those days, by then, Moses had passed. And prior to that, those years, he was in probably most of the time in Boston. Moses also gave the land where Gill, Massachusetts is today. Moses is buried at the granary in Boston. Next slide, please, Mary. Here we have Rebecca Boylston, which was Moses's second wife. This portrait also was done by Copley. It was done in 1767, and it also resides at RISD. She was also 6 years his senior. She was 45, he was 38 when they married. She is the sister of Mary Hollowell, which is the mother of Ward Nicholas. She was known as Madame Rebecca Gill, as well as being quite elegant. And I think that portrait shows us. It was quite elegant. Unfortunately, Madame Gill dies in 1798 and also with no children. For me, I would have to say that we would not be having this talk today if it wasn't for the two keystones in this whole history. And the two keystones I speak of are Sarah Prince and Rebecca Boylston. They made this all happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathaniel. For those of you who have been to the MFA, Rebecca has a painting by Copley there, as well as Ward Nicholas Boylston. And did you say, Nathaniel, that Moses, no, he's at RISD, correct?
All three of them are at RISD, which is
but there's two Rebecca Boylston. She does have one at MFA as well.
Yes, that's
yeah. I forgot to mention, which I thought was interesting, we're giving this talk on June 26th, 2022. And when I was researching the doctor with the inoculation, he gave the first inoculation on June 26th, 1721, exactly 301 years from this day. So I thought that was not life-shattering, but it's kind of fun when you have those correlations. So this is the Moses Gill house, which was next door, as Nathaniel said, it wasn't next door, it proceeded on the land to the Boylston house. Mr. President Adams came to see Ward Nicholas at the house, and you can see here he was quite impressed with it. He said, "I left your lofty situation and elegant establishment with the admiration that I shall never forget. I hope this noble seat will descend to your posterity in the name of Boylston forever and ever." Of course, it didn't happen forever and ever, but the family did live in the house for 98 years, going through about 4 generations. It's clear that they love the place. They put a lot into creating it and making it their home. And I'm not sure if Nathaniel mentioned it, but they stayed in the Gill mansion for many years, from like 1804 to 1819 when this was done. So they must have been happy to move into their own place. So let me tell you about the ownership. There hasn't been too many owners of the house. Of course, the Boylstons were there until 1918. I'm sorry, yes, 1918, when a family called Dr. George purchased the house. He only had the house for about 7 years. And then a family called the Sigourneys had it for 33 years. And I will say, just having personal experience with the Sigourneys, took impeccable care of the house. They kept it up to every standard imaginable. They had, I don't know, for people who are with the Worcester Art Museum, they had the freak paintings hanging in the house, which has since gone to the Worcester Art Museum, one of the earliest art in the United States. But it was a beautiful home, and they took very good care of it. After that, it had some down years. Let's say that we had some owners that had horses walking through the front hall, and then it was actually empty for a good 10 years because it had gone in such disrepair that there was even rumors of it being taken down and made into condos and that sort of thing. But that didn't happen, fortunately. So let's talk a little bit about the house. I'm no architect, but it's interesting to see, having lived there myself, it's interesting to see the interpretations of what it is. Everyone says everything from, is it Palladian, is it Bullfinch, is it Federal, is it Spanish, and is the coach house a church? If you've seen the house, they all want to know what it is because it's a very distinctive home. Well, there's no architect that's confirmed. When I moved to the house in '86, the person, someone had told me that, oh, the blueprints were around up to 30 years ago at that time, but they never surfaced, and it's never been confirmed that who it was. And it was referred to as the Bullfinch house many years, and it may have been a Bullfinch, but there's also Asher Benjamin. Whoops, sorry. Asher Benjamin is he was a very well-known architect at the time, and this is his picture here, no surprise there. And he was also a member of the Bullfinch firm. So it could mean that he was executing a Bullfinch design, but he also was very deeply involved with the supervision with the supplies. There's endless receipts for him buying the wood for the front door or the paints or the shutters or the windows. So he was a good friend of Ward Nicholas Boylston by all accounts, but he was very involved with it. But also, if you look at Asher Benjamin's work and his own contribution to architecture of that era, it's very significant. He doesn't have a name like Bullfinch, but he wrote over 7 books on building design, and he designed himself over 40 buildings. But what's interesting about this American Builders, the first one he wrote a number of them, is basically he wrote sort of a resource book for people who are building churches or homes, of what cornices, what windows, what, how you build an arch, how you do this. And his influence through that book is probably populated the New England seaboard and the whole Eastern seaboard, because when he was trying to build things himself, he realized they were always, redoing the, reinventing the wheel. So he was a very influential builder in his own right. And I just gave you an example. This is just a house in Millbury, which has some similarities to the Boylston house. Now, as you look at it on this side, you can see the hip roof. Again, I'm not an architect, and this portico is different. But when you see the house from another angle, it's kind of interesting to see, the corollaries here. As I said, he designed over and built over 40 buildings, so there's a lot. So I was just curious to see if we could figure out what style is. And I happened upon a book that I had myself that bought it some, when you live in a house like this, you tend to be very interested in this stuff. And this is a book by a couple named Virginia and Lee McAllister, and it's called The Field Guide to American Houses. And it doesn't escape me the similarity of what they did in their tome about houses and different styles, what they did to act as Asher Benjamin did at his time. This is a description of Adam architecture, which I think this is most likely what the Boylston house is. And they go through every structural element that shows the progression of an architecture. And many of you may not have heard of Adam architecture because it was a very short period of time. And it was prompted by 2 brothers named Adam in England. And it went as far as from 1780 to 1820, but it extended in the US until 1840. But just as an interesting fact here, if you look at, it's hard to read, it talks about the different elements of the door or the home. For here it says you'll have a fan light over the door, and you'll have these windows along the side. And this is exactly what our house has. But then it had other elements talking about the architecture. It said the cornice will be decorated with dentils. And so here are the dentils with the cornice there. The windows will be double hung with sashes 6 over 6. Again, this is what we have. The windows aligned horizontally and vertically in symmetrical rows, which of course is what's happening here. And it says it's usually 5 across, this being the front. So it looks like it does have some Adam-esque elements to it. And it also mentions a Palladian style window over the main entrance. the use of keystone lintels. You see this here below or sometimes above. So it's kind of interesting to see these characteristics. Again, there's a lot of different, you've got Georgian, they all have many of these elements. It's just having them together. So I thought that was interesting because someone had mentioned many years ago Adam architecture, but I hadn't heard it at the time. So maybe it's correct. But that being said, a lot of these elements were added later during about 1853 when John Lane Boylston was the son of Ward Nicholas Boylston. Came to they suspect it was because of a wedding in 1853 that their two daughters were getting married, Louisa and Mary, and so they added a lot of elements to the house. Here's some pictures, various pictures of the home. We recreated these awnings, so that's the great thing about old pictures. When you have old pictures like this, you can see what was before. But look here, you see here in the house here, it does not have the monitor up at the top here. It does have the portico and it's square there. But the chimneys, of course, are the same. So there are some differences. Again, they added the half round dormer windows here, and they don't have them here. And you'll see as the house progresses later on, there's dormers down on either side there. So the house has gone through evolutions as they all do. But the most distinctive part would be the monitor, this portico, and the dormers. Just as an interesting thing with the monitor, to get to that monitor, there's a steep stairwell to get into the monitor. It has windows on all sides, as you can see, and it has a fabulous view. Although the windows are pretty high, you need something to stand up on. But what was interesting is the room down below that had all the rooms down below that had an open doorway. Certainly, you can pull a window open. So when it was hot, just like in the Far East, all the wind would come out of the top of the monitor, which was really kind of cool. They had this whole roping system to make this to be a practical thing, not just an aesthetic. I was gonna mention one thing about the wedding. The wedding, there were, we still have gifts for the wedding, which are little pin cushions, which are just little white, I would say about 10 inches long. And they're pin cushions with the heads of the pins showing the house. It's a decoration of the house in pins. And the other one, I can't remember exactly the design of that, maybe from the town. But it's really intricate and lovely. And one of the contemporary letters mentions the pin cushions. But it was an interesting time. They both married men from Providence, and so they were off. And the wedding took place with the Princeton local band, and everyone shook hands, as the letter said, because everyone shook hands with the bride and grooms because there's little kissing because Mary and Louisa wouldn't have any. So it was not an emotional affair. It was a getting it done. There's much reference to not trying to cry. So, so again, there were a lot of changes along the way. Ward Nicholas Boylston II changed the library to a bathroom on the first floor. And this carriage house here, this one here to the right, was originally, as you saw that original photo, we suspect the carriages would come up here and unload here and people would walk to the house. Ward Nicholas Boylston II was a great hunter, so he made that sort of his clubhouse and hunting room. And it was the Sigourneys who added the dormers on the end. As you drive by, you can see them. What most people don't see, as I alluded to before, is the back of the house. And again, this is very Jeffersonian, I would say, because it makes you think of Monticello. Again, I'm not an architect, so I won't make an assessment on that. But again, there were changes here because when we moved to the house, this staircase was here, but it was barely usable. And here it wasn't existing at all. So we ended up putting it back, and now it's no longer there again. So things change with these homes. But this is a lovely backyard. And of course, this has a 60-mile view that you can see Boston. At one time, they said that from this view, you could see the town, you could see the water, the ships on a clear day. The view is fantastic. One of the rumors of I call it a rumor because I don't know 100% sure. One of the great distinctions of this house was its wallpaper from France that was on the entire shared first floor. And this wallpaper was from a place called Dufour, Joseph Dufour of France. And they used to say that that JQA had brought the wallpaper for Lord Nicholas Boylston for his house from France, or bought it as a gift. And I really never confirmed that or denied that. Those stories tend to pop up. But and then when I was reading about JQA recently, he was the Secretary of State for Monroe, and he came back for that role from Europe in 1817, which would have been perfect timing for him to bring this wallpaper back. So I don't know for sure still, but it is a very high probability. This picture here is not from the house. This is just to show you what the Bay of Naples looks like, a segment of it. It was all black and white, all of the papers, and it was in various rooms, as you can see here. This is in the front hall, and this is called the seasons. You can see there's haying time, winter, and that must be fall. I can't really tell. This paper in the main drawing room, this was, I think this was the Bay of Naples. This was my favorite. You have to understand, it was because the roof had been leaking for years and years and years. The entire inside was very ruined. So the papers weren't intact when we moved there. They were there. It's unfortunate you can't see here. The Passage Indienne was a beautiful orange and browns and just a very colorful paper. It was gorgeous. In this here, you can't see it very well, but I don't know if it was the dress of the time or it is actually them. They always say that that's Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, but I don't know. There probably were a lot of middle-aged, half-bald men that look like that with the same outfit. So here's the rooms of the house for those who have or haven't been in there. These are pretty dated. I would say they're turn of the century. They're probably they're definitely when the Boylston still owned it. What you can see here is the Boylston crest, which also includes, I believe, the Adams crest, but I'm not quite sure of that. I'm not sure if it's just the Boylston, but you can see how much the paper, this is Passage Indienne. So this is the one that's orange, and it's from India. You know, it has those types of scenes. It was lovely. So this is the main hallway when you walk in the door and you're looking at, I think they call this the drawing room. Sorry, the rooms change a lot, so I'm not sure. This is one of the things that the John Lane added in 1850, this lovely marble fireplace here. But you can see there's a lot of architectural details. It's just a lovely home. This is the same room at either end, and you see here, here's Rebecca Boylston that we just saw. I'm not sure if, Nathaniel, is that the same exact painting, or is this the one that's in MFA? I can't tell.
It's
Maybe
hard to
don't.
see from here, but I think it might be the one that's in the MFA.
Yeah, because it's very similar, I know. And this looks like Sarah, but I don't know if it is her, so I won't say yes. But you could see the Bay of Naples. Look at these dramatic, beautiful ships and so forth. And of course, the style of the time was to have rugs like this, but the wallpaper was very, very well talked about. When we talked before about the bathroom, in there used to go to the library, but that's been changed to a bathroom probably for 80, 100 years. And this door goes to the, let me see if I get myself. Yeah, this was a closet. Actually, it turned into a staircase. It turns out you can't get to the staircase from there. But a funny story. Go ahead.
That room that you're in right now with the twin doors, is that the dining room?
No.
No.
Well, no, wait, I don't, right now it's not a dining room. I don't know which room. No.
Okay.
This is the, well, I guess it would be considered the dining room. Yes, now. No, sorry. It depends who's using it. Which room are you referring to, Nathaniel?
I'm going back to the previous owners. Did they use it as a dining room?
No.
Okay.
No, because there's not two doors in that room.
All right.
Yeah. It is confusing. This is the other side of this room. These doors aren't as prominent now. And they're not the same way, so it's hard to tell. But this is the other side of this room. You can tell by this. Anyway, a funny story about the wallpaper. Many people talked about the wallpaper, and Mrs. George, who lived there in 1825 for 7 years, she said, I think she was a little bit irritated. She said about up to 30 people a day on a Sunday would come to ask to see the wallpaper. She didn't mention if she let them in or not, but she clearly wasn't too pleased about it. But it was a different era that people would come and knock on your door to say, can I see your wallpaper? So it was a very special thing. And there are I think there's only a handful of houses that still have the wallpaper in situ, although it's available. Sometimes you can buy some of them reproduced, or some of them are, I think there's a bit of it in the museum in New York. So I hope I didn't go too fast, or I hope you enjoyed this. I think the Boylstons love their house, and they took good care of it. And it was just because Ward Nicholas Boylston III got called, you know, he ended up going to Florida, and it probably just didn't make sense to have the house. But everyone after that has taken it as a real gem for Princeton and for architecture and just history, and have been great caretakers. So I always love this quote. I found at the Boston Public Library Award, Nicholas Boylston. He said, speaking of the storms, it reminds me of a northern winter. If you knew of my lot in winter, situated up on a hill, where the snow remains almost to May and blows almost all the time, I think you would conclude that the link that binds a man to his property would be the only one which would bind him to these regions. And that certainly speaks of Princeton. So thank you all. I hope that was interesting and informative. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Oh,
Mary?
I'm stopping sharing right now. Yes.
Chris Borderline comments that she believes 2 of the paintings in the room on the right on the last slide are paintings that she has inherited.
That's a he. Chris is a man. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Chris,
Can we go back to that slide, Mary, so we could just see what?
I will. Hi, Chris. 1 sec. I have to share again.
Oh, even better.
Exhibit A. Chris is a descendant of the Boylston family. Hold on a sec.
Go ahead and unmute there, Chris.
Nice, Chris, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. No, I think I was mistaken. It's another 1800s portrait, and the one on the right looked like a Grand Tour souvenir that I have probably from Turkey. But again, I think my eyesight, I had the magnifying glass up. It looks more like a contemporary American than
Chris, were you talking about this right here?
Yeah, I was talking about
this one?
those 2. Yep, on either side. But the man is seated the opposite way. It kind of looks like the same sort of style.
Yeah.
And then the other looks like an American or white woman. The one I have is.
This definitely looks like Sarah Prince to me, but we'll have to examine that closer.
Yeah.
Chris also had an earlier question. Why were so many paintings left to the Rhode Island School of Design?
That's something I cannot answer. We can look into that.
I'll find out, Chris. I don't know either.
Okay, thank you.
It's obviously a connection, which is always the case, but I don't know. Any other questions?
A question, the house sold in the recent past, is that true?
Yeah, it sold a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years. 2 years this month, I think. Yep. to a family that moved in about a year ago. They were away. They hadn't moved in yet. And they love it too. It's great. Just great caretakers. Well, great. We love, if you're not a member, or I think that's the list today. If you're not a member of the Historical Society, we'd love to have you participate. If you have any questions or want any information about anything, every object, every thought, every event has so many ways you can go in terms of history. So it's kind of fun. All right, we'll call it a day.
Question?
I'm glad you made it on finally, Chris.
Mary, you have another question from Charlie Carey. Any background on the Hessian Bridge?
Oh, we've already gone through that question. I think, Charlie, we weren't able to find anything on the Hessian Bridge. You mean the story behind building it down in the back of, actually, of the Brooks Farm area?
Right. I would call it more of a ramp than a bridge. And from what I understand, I believe the Hessians only spent about 6 months in the prison camps over in Barry. If you get in contact with the Massachusetts Historical Society, that's what they state. So I'm not sure how many bridges and walls were actually so-called built by the Hessians. If they're only there 6 months, they're not doing all the work that is attributed to them.
Yeah, it's been called Hessian Bridge since I've been around, but the Hessian Bridge was there long before I was around, so who knows?
Was there any connection to the Boylstons that we are aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
The ramp itself?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, would that be the road that would lead? No, that's too far down. I was wondering if that would be the part of the road that would lead up, Mary, to the back, which would be the front of
Right. Harry, do we have roads behind there? Do we have any historical? Because our maps only go back to, like, I don't know, the earliest one's like 18. It's a very select group. It doesn't cover the back of that. Even that road we're talking about, the country road, I'd love to see how roads change a lot over the years. So I don't know. I know when you did a lot of, yeah. Be
I'd
nice
have to
to
go back
see
and
if it
look at
was
the
somewhere else.
Area map.
Yeah, as opposed to the printed map.
If you
ago
go,
was that Boylston built it because the road to the center of town is too steep to get artillery up to his
Oh.
house, and he wanted to protect himself from the rebels. Now,
Who did you start off with? Who built it?
what's that?
I didn't
Who
say.
built it? Yeah, well, yeah. The reason, the story was that he had access to Hessian slaves, and that he didn't want, he wanted to be able to make sure he could get artillery up to protect it.
Who is he? That's what I'm trying to
Oh,
find out.
Boylston.
Okay, you said Boylston. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
But
I
I would
hadn't
say
heard that.
that's family lore.
It was probably Moses.
yeah, because the timeline, Charlie, doesn't line up.
Yeah.
You know, Boylston didn't start to build that until, when it was finished, Mary, what? in
19, yeah.
So that's even after the War of 1812.
But it was probably Gil, if it was, but I hadn't heard that. But there's not a lot about Gil other than similar to what Nathaniel said about being here. Like when they moved here, how they built the house, because it's quite a house. You think there'd be some history of them building that mansion, but granted, I haven't gone personally to research it, but.
And the cellar hole is still visible. It's mainly filled in now, but as you're going down Worcester Road to, it's off to the left, of course, and it's in that field, and it's just a small indentation now, but the cellar hole to the 50 by 50 main mansion is still there.
Got it. All right, I will stop spreading rumors.
Hey, go for it.
As usual.
You'll still have them 100 years later, Charlie. You'll have they'll remember you. If anyone, thank you also for attending. We appreciate it. If you have any more questions from anybody? Harry or nope? All done.
That's great. Thanks
Okay,
a lot.
enjoy your day. Thank you all for coming. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep, bye.
Thanks.